Welcome all who are already in the room, and to those that are coming in, welcome also. My name is Sumaya Hamdani. I'm an associate professor of history here at George Mason University and one of the core faculty members of the Ali Vural Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies. Thank you for joining us today for the third session of our Center for Global Islamic Studies webinar series on COVID-19 and Muslim religiosity. Today we are going to be joined by Dr. Dietrich Reetz, who will be speaking to us on COVID-19 and the missionary work of the Tablighi Jamaat in South Asia and beyond, negotiating grassroots activism, religious authority, and the state. If you have missed our previous webinars in this series, you can access them from the Ali Vural Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies website or the center's Vimeo account. A few administrative details first. The center's program coordinator, Aisha Noor Sonmaskara, will be hosting and supporting this webinar, and she will be posting reminders and links in the chat box. If you have any questions, you can private chat with her and we can resolve any technical or any other issue that you might have. Please refrain from private chatting with our speaker during this presentation. During the talk, all attendees will be muted. There will be a Q&A period after Dr. Reetz finishes presenting. During the Q&A session, you can raise your hand and we will ask you to unmute yourself to ask the question. If you prefer to type your question in the chat, you can also read it. We can also read it rather during the Q&A. So we'll call on people who have questions either verbally or in the chat. The chat is able to be viewed by all participants. I'd also like you to know that the webinar, including the Q&A session, is being recorded so that it can be made available via the center's website and social media in about a week. We encourage you to visit the website of the Ali Vural Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies to learn more about its projects, programs, and people, and to also take a look at Maidan, the online publication of the center. Please note the next session in this center's webinar series will be on July 28th with Dr. Sean McLaughlin from the University of Leeds in the UK, and he will be speaking on the Hajj and COVID-19, Saudi Arabia, the transnational pilgrimage industry, and Muslim religiosities in diaspora. You can visit the center's website for details about that particular talk. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our presenter this afternoon, Dr. Dietrich Reetz. Dr. Reetz is a senior research fellow at the, forgive my pronunciation, the Leibniz Zentrum Moderne Orient, and associate professor at the Department of Political Science at the Free University in Berlin. His research and teaching focuses on Islam and politics, with a special focus on regions outside the Arabian Peninsula, such as South and Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and Europe. He has particular interest in the global networking of the Islamic educational movement of Deoband, the Tablighi Jamaat, and the international Islamic universities in Islamabad and Kuala Lumpur. Between 2011 and 2016, he co-chaired the Research and Competence Network Grassroots Asia, which studied interaction between South and Central Asia. From 2005 to 2009, he headed a research group studying Muslims in Europe and their countries of origin in Asia and Africa, funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research. He graduated in international politics with a regional focus on South Asia from Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and has done his doctorate in South Asian history at Humboldt University in Berlin. He was previously a fellow at Cornell University in the US and at St. Anthony's in Oxford, at Oxford in the UK. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Reetz today.
Thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you so much for having me and for the invitation. I'm just sharing the screen and I hope everything will work well. I understand that you can see it. Well, this research is part of my ongoing research on Deobandi Islam and the Tablighi Jamaat, which all in all, I have been doing now for almost 25 years. And out of it came a publication on Islam in the Public Sphere, which came out with OUP in 2006, Religious Groups in India, 1900-1947, which amongst other groups also covered the origins and the initial stage of the formation of the Tablighi Jamaat. Then I was lucky to continue doing regional studies of the Tablighi Jamaat and the Deobandi institutions and network in South Asia, in South Africa, Southeast Asia, Western Europe, North America, and Central Asia. If you're interested in further details and some of the regional publications, you can check it out on my profile at academia.edu, where they are all available. What I'm normally doing when I'm covering the Tablighi Jamaat to look from an interdisciplinary perspective. For me, they are not only a religious actor and institution and network, but I'm also very much interested in the social and political dimension and the consequences of their activities. In the current situation, the engagement with the pandemic, obviously this is just a preliminary and selective account, and by no means I can make a claim to a complete picturing and analysis at this moment, since that is also a developing story. As you perhaps have known and have also seen in the media, the Tablighi Jamaat was coming into the focus of local and regional politics and media coverage during the Corona crisis. Gatherings in various countries, what are called the Ijtima, or convocations, which are a regular format of the Tablighi Jamaat in India, Pakistan, but also Malaysia and Indonesia, turned into hotspots of Corona infections, which local authorities registered when they analyzed the patients and the chain of infection that developed from there. This happened, and the engagement with the public and also with the media and the politics in an environment which was polarized by also nationalistic and communal tension in politics. Here we can just briefly see some of the coverage where the line of events started, pointing to their particular and special role in Malaysia, where there was a report about cases directly linked to the event, to the Ijtima in late February, early March. Then there was news about dozens of Thai participants testing positive after returning from a similar event in Indonesia, following up on the Malaysian event. And in Indonesia as well, the congregation was stopped after one day, and the people were sent home, although a large number of people had already arrived. And we have also very similar news from Pakistan, where in Rawalpindi, which is a place not far from Lahore and where there is the center of the Tablighi Jamaat for Pakistan. A congregation was happening and where authorities registered cases together connected with the event. And in India, participants were noted as carrying the infection also to other parts of the country. For instance, here we have a report from Malappuram, which is in the south, quite a distance from Delhi, where the meeting happened. But we obviously have to put this in a global perspective. This development, this chain of events, is not dissimilar to the role religious gatherings had played in the dissemination of the virus in Europe and also in Asia, actually. I just mentioned here the 5-day prayer meeting at the evangelical church known as Christian Open Door in Mulhouse, France, and the Baptist church service in Hanau and Frankfurt. And there were similar reports about such events in South Korea and Singapore. To give you just a brief background to those who are not fully familiar with the Tablighi Jamaat, it is a missionary movement of primarily Sunni Islam of South Asian origin, which is doing dawah. It was founded in 1926 and primarily originally to enhance religious practice and belief in the Mewat region surrounding Delhi, primarily amongst people who were seen or understood as converts and who were claimed also by, at that time, upsurging nationalist Hindu movements. It is important in this context to remember that it is a lay movement with an extensive administration system, a strongly organized intizam, which regulates the movement. And that is also obviously necessary because the movement is operating globally with a center, the global center in Delhi, in the part of the city called Nizamuddin, and with another competing or parallel center in Pakistan in the Rawalpindi, not far from Lahore. And the lay movement is important to remember because it means that people do not necessarily have a membership, but if they follow the practice and the rituals of the prayer, of the preaching, walks and sessions, they will become more and more aligned and associated with the movement. Its founder was Muhammad Ilyas. He formulated 6 points to follow for increasing religiosity. And for our purpose, it is important to remember that personal outreach was important and the preaching was. The matter was complicated by the fact that the Tablighi Jamaat split into 2 factions in November 2015. One of them was associated with their global center, the Alami Markas in Nizamuddin, Delhi, under Maulana Saad Kandalawi, and the other, and there was the Global Council or Alami Shura in Lahore in the Rawalpindi. And that was not only a split about and between personalities and leadership, it was also about how to lead the movement. So there was the idea whether it should be led by a shura or council and or by an amir or leader. They developed also ideological and programmatic differences, which I cannot cover here in detail, only meaning that certain practices which they had done before and shared in the whole movement, they were suddenly seen as aberration by one faction and held up by the other faction. For example, a prominent case for that is to regard the global center, the Markaz in Nizamuddin, as the world Markaz, and a Markaz, a center which was competing with Makkah or Medina. This was strongly opposed and is strongly opposed by the competition and by the competing faction in Raivin, which regards this pronouncement as wrong. But what I remember is that in the past, the 3 convocations which happened annually in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh were repeatedly by all leaders actually called one of the largest, if not the largest gathering of the Muslim world, where each of these convocations attracted 2 million or more people, and that in a cycle, one after another. The initial religious arguments about the coronavirus were not dissimilar to the pronouncements of other Muslim religious leaders. Maulana Saad, the leader in Delhi, called it azab and azmaish, a trial. Social distancing and avoiding mosque for prayer was called batil khayal, a wrong thought or approach. And Tariq Jamil, a prominent preacher from Pakistan, a celebrity and social media star, was more careful, but still would argue God chooses who's infected and who is not. God will save, meaning to say we can do little about it. Here we have Maulana Saad.
अज़ाब को हटाने के मादी असबाब नहीं देखे जाते, बल्कि अज़ाब के आने के असबाब देखे जाते हैं। और इनके साथ साथ ये देखा जाता है कि वो कौन से अमाल हैं जिन अमाल पर अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त राज़ी होकर अज़ाब को हटा दें। किसी भी इलाके वाले जमातों की नक़्ल हरकत में किसी भी हालात की वजह से.
So he is also explaining why and how he's called it azab. Just in passing, I want to highlight the importance of social media for the operation of the movement and of the 2 factions, which is an interesting transformation if we look back 10 or 20 years ago, where this was unthinkable and unimaginable, and now a large part of the mobilization happens through the social media. And also the contestation, as you could see before, is going through various channels. This is Tariq Jamil.
China से शुरू हुआ, उसको कोरोना कहते हैं। वो इतनी तेजी से फैली है कि चाइना के साथ आमद रफ्त बंद हो गई है, कारोबार बंद हो गया है, लेकिन फिर भी वो फैल गई है। सऊदी अरब ने उम्रे बंद कर दिए हैं, किसी को उम्रे पर आने की इजाजत नहीं है। पाकिस्तान में भी उसका खौफ फैला हुआ है। तो हमारे नबी फरमाते हैं ला अदवा फिल इस्लाम। एक तो हमें बुनियाद बताई कि बीमारी आती है अल्लाह की तरफ से।
So you can see that he also makes this argument that in the end it's the decision and choice by Allah that is happening. And when we come to the modes of dealing with it, it is also particularly emphasis on praying and also the duties and the rituals of the movement itself, the amal. So the study of the Quran is seen as a way of dealing with the quarantine. And we have here is a statement by the prominent activist Sheikh Maulana Ibrahim Devla. This is for the Shura faction and published on their Facebook account, where he calls the dua, the prayer, the only weapon that is available. There is also other advice where based on Quranic and Hadith references, the black seed are recommended as being used, the black cumin. And here we have Taqi Usmani, a prominent Deobandi Mufti and internationally well-known scholar who is running his own important madrasa in Karachi with the Deoband curriculum, but he is also has become and became a strong reference for the Tablighi Jamaat, where his advice and his authority and his reputation are used to communicate to followers what to do in the situation. This situation became rather complicated. Pakistan, India, they were struggling in terms of religious institutions, how to deal with it. In Pakistan, social distancing and closing mosques or not became a matter of negotiations. And what happened for the first time, as far as I remember, is that the religious groups, the sectarian denominations, they were actually represented by the madrasa boards, not by the parties or not by the religious political parties or single leaders, but by the madrasa boards in negotiations with the state and actually with the president. And these negotiations, they were somehow coordinated by Mufti Taqi Usmani. So we saw also a transformation and an emergence of a mechanism that had not existed before. One of the results was a 20-point standard operation procedure, which the president negotiated with the participants on 18th of April, notably also in preparation for the Ramadan. Before, there were guidelines by the Council of Islamic Ideology, and the Council of Islamic Ideology is a government department, and it somehow laid the foundation for the later agreement. What was at issue here at the agreement was to what extent the mosques would remain open or not, and during Ramadan in Pakistan, at least a strong emphasis is put on the Taraweeh prayer, which the ulama insisted should go on and should go on in the mosque, but the scholars recommended to also do them at home, and when attending the mosque, follow certain procedures where in the beginning and for a certain period, very few people would enter the mosque, only 5-6 people, and together with the organizer, with the imam and the khatib, so that in fact very few people were participating. This was a compromise to avoid a nominal closure. Here again, Tariq Jamil became a key communicator for the process and explained to the followers that restraint is possible, social distancing is also possible, praying from home is also possible. And he played a particular role also negotiating with the state and the government because he met Imran Khan and he showed and symbolized that they're keeping distance, and in a sense he bridged the communication. This is the 20-point procedure for the prayers, and it was understood that people should keep a distance. There were strict safety measures imposed in madaris, in mosques, but it is understood, and it was also a complaint that many mosques did not follow this procedure. Yet, on the other hand, it may also be encouraging sign that a large number of mosques, in fact, did follow and did arrange for such procedures and for such measures. One of the key events which also became an issue of quarrel was a jor of old members in Raiwind. The government had originally tried to stop it, but was not successful. But then the rain, in a sense, helped the development, because the rain was used as an argument that the congregation ground is no longer accessible, so it could then be terminated. But then on the 13th, after the termination, of course, the meeting ground was still full with participants. In India, apparently and obviously, the Maulana Azad faced a much more tense situation with the Hindu nationalist government under Modi. And we have a very dense and tight schedule of meetings. And there was a global meeting of leaders, a mashwara of decision makers from different countries. This was understood and seen as being key to the spread of the virus. But we had similar events, because there is a very dense schedule of both factions operating in parallel, both in India and Pakistan, and now in all countries where they're active in parallel. And there was the Odisha Assembly, which attracted a large number of participants, and which was also seen as causing these infections. This created a lot of tension with the local society and with the police as well. There were mutual accusations, there were complaints. Maulana Azad was accused and was, and in so-called FIR, First Information Report, or police case was launched against him. The police argued that it did inform them in time, whereas the people from the Markaz argued they were not informed and they were not tested, and in fact they followed all the procedures. While Maulana Azad in the beginning was understood as having emphasized the punishment more, he at this point became very much following the procedures and the obligations of the administration, where he tried to comply. And not only that, they started a campaign in India that Tablighis who had gone through the infection and who became healthy again would donate the blood plasma to society, showing their approach and their understanding how to deal with such a situation and how to help people. And also civil society in India mobilized against what was seen as targeting the Tablighi Jamaat, where campaigns were started to support them. Here you can see how the donation was processing, and how they were hoping and trying to change the impression and the public impact of the operation of the Tablighi Jamaat in India. This shows that the contestation has been quite strong, but in a sense, the last thing I want to show you is that the term Azmaish, which plays a strong role in the religious argument, has ultimately played a bridging role in India, because it is a trial which was shared by society, and it became a reference which also partly bridged the cultural and religious divides. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through the whole song, but on this more optimistic note, I would end the presentation. Thank you.
That was a fascinating presentation, Dr. Reetz, of all the many, not only of the background of the Tablighi Jamaat, but also of how they have become involved in this pandemic, and how they've evolved their response to the pandemic. And we are now entering the Q&A period. So if anyone has a question for Dr. Reetz, the host of our webinar, Aishanur, will be letting us know who might have a question. But maybe I can make bold and sort of begin. So, I mean, I think what's interesting is the way in which the Tablighi Jamaat, on the one hand, as you were explaining in your background about it, began as a movement of kind of, Islamic revival on the social and individual level, and, remained kind of sort of maintained a resolutely apolitical stance. On the other hand, as your own research has shown, they can't, avoid the state. So politics will come into some of the ways in which they operate and also react to things like the pandemic. And it was fascinating to see how they attempted to kind of, meet the state on its terms in both Pakistan and India, and became involved in state efforts and state policy to combat COVID, if only to avoid being blamed for spreading COVID-19 in those countries. So if I may ask, how does that square with their official apolitical stance?
I think that is no contradiction, because the contradictory elements coexist, and they coexist all the time, because the Tablighi Jamaat is successful because what I normally say is they are fitting a local situation like a glove. So they are adapting to it, and in their social activity, they cannot but also have some sort of public, and therefore by extension, political impact.
Right.
And they are trying to translate that into larger visibility and more impact for their own program.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, actually. And it says something about also the nature of the state today and how the state is, you know, absolutely, you know, critical to dealing with things like pandemics and other society-wide challenges. So even groups like Tablighi Jamaat have to engage the state and have to gain the sort of favor of the state or partner with the state, if you will. Go ahead, Peter. I don't know if it's my role or Aishanur's role to recognize you, but Peter has a question.
There is a number of questions on the chat I saw.
I see, okay.
Yes, I think there are a couple of others in the queue ahead of me on the chat room.
Okay.
So are we going to address the request?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. Hi. This is Aishanur. So I see some questions written to me directly. So I will read them in the order they appear in the chat box. So one from Dr. Shabana Mir. So she's asking, is there discernible internal diversity of view on correct TJ practice during the pandemic?
That is an interesting question, notably because of the faction of infighting, where they do not, hesitate to attack each other. In the pandemic, they try to avoid it. And what my impression was from looking at some of their statements was in my research, what I call digital anthropology, I saw one person, one alim making the statement, I'm asked which faction to join, and especially now. And he said, join both. They are having more impact. There is more activity, so no worries. So in a sense, it was a kind of a peace, interim peace in times of being attacked, while at the same time, the formation of the two factions has in fact increased their impact, because just imagine all their activities doubled almost. Not fully, not entirely, but significantly increased.
Peter?
Thanks very much, Dietrich, for a very interesting presentation. I wanted to ask a little bit about the kind of the response of other Muslim groups and institutions to tablighis in the context of COVID-19. Obviously, as you know, this is the most ubiquitous transnational Muslim movement in the world. You know, they have a truly global presence, and you know, many mosques that are not necessarily affiliated with the tablighis or even Deobandi mosques, you know, often have space and facilities that tablighis stay in when they come by to visit. And so I'm wondering, you know, have you tracked the extent to which we've seen anything like sort of the enactment of quarantines against visiting tablighi groups in other settings and contexts around the world? Thank you.
Well, definitely we have seen that in Pakistan, where in fact at times was a certain amount of public tension unusual for Pakistan in relation to the Tablighi Jamaat, where even critical voices were coming from other Muslim groups, being, irritated about this development, and also scared and fearful that it would have an impact on their own activities. So yes, the quarantine was organized, and it was the Pakistan state which then intervened and regularized the quarantine system for the tablighis. But what is interesting and what I wanted to add is that this is not just, and therefore it is not so easy to form an opinion about the way the tablighi system operates a question of command and following, because many people participate in these congregations, and the ritual is you leave the congregation and you go on another preaching tour in the country where you actually are. So a lot of people who attended the Raivin and the Odisha and the other events, when they traveled out, many of them then not necessarily have a phone, have a mobile, so they at times also remain clueless what was happening. And it was some sort of a, I'm not saying anarchic, but rather street level development, which happened, which also led to a number of delays where particularly foreign participants were trapped. Foreign participants who regularly attend, not only in the hundreds, but thousands, to the point where in India now their visa have been revoked, which is another sort of, I would argue, symbolic politics, because for years, decades, the Indian system had accepted issuing tourist visa to people coming from other countries attending the events.
I have one comment to make.
Okay.
This is Abdul. Hi, Professor. Thanks for this fascinating talk. My question is that the way government of Hindu nationalist government in India and even the so-called mainstream media haunted Tablighi Jamaat and the was. Do you think that this might lead to a different kind of their imaginations about the material world, because the way they understand material world, generally in our common sayings, that they think about Kabristan and about heaven, the middle part of India, the material world. Now, do you think, is there any possibility of their changing imaginations about the material world, especially the way it took place in Nizamuddin in Delhi?
You mean among the Tablighis?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that this would have much influence on the rituals and on the practice. But yes, internally, I mean, one can only assume that there will be discussions on how to deal with the contestation between the factions, because Maulana Saad and the faction there is still heavily embroiled and a lot of pressure, where the political, the ideological, and the factionalism come together. So this may or may not transform into changes of cooperation and of the leadership systems, and perhaps also in terms of communication, how to deal with it. But this is really difficult to judge. Why? Because both sides, and also Nizamuddin, they are so strongly engaged in social media. I mean, they have their own channels, they have their own apps, they have their, I mean, everything. So this contestation is perhaps, from my perspective as an outsider, increasingly coming in the way of their original program. And we can only watch what that would ultimately mean. But India, in the current situation, is more a ground for this conflict than perhaps Pakistan.
Thank you, Dr. Reetz. So I see another question from Dr. Ferit Esak. He raised his hand. So Dr. Esak, you are welcome to ask your questions by yourself, or if you prefer me to read it, I also see in the chat, I can read it.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Just two quick ones. The general tenor of your talk and of the moderator's comments is that the Tablighi Jamaat is kind of apolitical. That was the word that was used. I put it to you that they're not really apolitical. They are opposed to party politics in different countries and in all countries. But the principled position that they move from is one of acquiescence with the state. There isn't active support for the state, but there is a principle of no opposition to the state. And you support the general dictates and laws of the country wherein you operate. And in countries, of course, where the state is being contested, or the nature of the state, in India, for example, or in apartheid South Africa, to say that you should not engage in any opposition to the state, that is in fact a political position.
Yes.
And so the history of the Tablighi Jamaat is one of taking acquiescent, accommodationist, pro-state positions. It is routine for them to invite the presidents, even the same goes for Deoband, the presidents or the mayors of the city to come to the Ijtima, or government ministers to come to the Ijtima in countries where governments are like illegitimate or badly contested. So, so this is just my, my one question. My second question is there anything consequential or really different in the way they responded to pandemics or the phenomenon of communal illnesses than what any other traditional conservative religious community from amongst the Jews or Christians or whoever else? I mean, the logic has really been the same. So in some ways, there's nothing unique about them, isn't it? That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. I feel it depends a lot how you define and understand political, because for me, the meaning of it is to a large extent by impact and contextual, what I tried to explain before, that I would not call them apolitical. I would always call them having political consequences. And while their leadership is interested not to challenge the state and the government, where I fully agree with you, by consequence, they actually do challenge the system and the government because of the impact of their interventions. For instance, that is very much true in India right now. I mean, this was, in a sense, an impact that was oppositional. But I have come across similar impacts in, for instance, Europe, where conservative Tablighis in France and in Britain aligned with local conservative leaders to somehow create space for Islam and for Muslim lives and behavior. In Dewsbury, for instance, where they determine the living style in city in a quarter, we don't have to call it oppositional, but it is definitely not necessarily supportive of the state and authority. And the amount or the circumstances vary under which they are doing it. Many years ago, when I started my research, in fact, I was informed of talks the Tablighi leaders in Pakistan had with the Taliban leader Mullah Omar when he was visiting them, and they were actually somehow politely trying to tell him that it's not such a bad idea to basically engage in something similar what the Tablighis do, in brackets, not pronounced and not killing people. They did not say it, they were not successful, they would not confront him. But can we call this apolitical? This is very political. So the mode of communication and the importance of the context is very significant to understand the politics of Tablighi activity. The second question, yes, I fully agree that from a religious, traditional religious approach, it is not different. It is what I'm trying to argue. It's the social and the political impact and consequences that I was looking at and trying to understand how society deals with these interventions and how they deal with the intervention of society in their activities.
Thank you, Dr. Reetz. So there is another question from Sumrin Kalia. So you have given interesting comparison of India and Pakistan. I'm curious about how the success of negotiations between the state and religious groups work owing to the secularity in India and Islamic nature of the state.
As we could see in Pakistan, there was a rather formalized negotiation in which the Tablighi Jamaat was not explicitly present and participating, but nevertheless the state, through communicators like Tariq Jamil, has already established bridges which help to interact and also to influence its impact. In India, the interaction with the state, I would argue, is not absent, but it is very informal, and it has been shaped through decades of interaction on a local level with the police, with the administration, with the city administration, with the district administration. And there may at times be tension, and at other times there is acquiescence and mutual support, because the coexistence and the mutual neighborhood of these institutions of Muslim, Hindu, and secular life worlds has long been tested and has long been operated in many different ways in India. And we do not have to take necessarily the symbolic pronouncements of BJP activists as the whole truth about the interaction of government systems or government officials or police officials with the Tablighi Jamaat and their institutions and their leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Reetz. So we have lots of questions actually, I see. So the next one is from Riaz Timol from Cardiff University. So he's asking, to what extent would you say the response to COVID-19 by different factions of Tablighi Jamaat plays out as an epistemological conflict between asbab and yaqeen, or utilizing quote-unquote means to protect oneself from the decree of God?
Yes, I mean, as I try to argue, I see it at this particular moment not necessarily as a conflict highlighting the way how to deal with it. So yes, both sides, in fact, the Raibin and the Nizamuddin faction, they support fulfilling the religious task in terms of du'as. There is a small difference which has to do with factionalism and is, I would argue, almost ideological, that, as I showed in one of the slides, the Amir faction is emphasizing such rituals as takaza and amal. These formats, these activities, these rituals have been formed or invented or shaped over the decades of the Tablighi Jamaat. now suddenly the Lahore or Ravin faction is pretending that this is not correct. This is not really the substance. This is not, and so they are trying to argue that they actually want to go back to the Quran, to the Hadith, to what was literally said there, while the whole movement had lived with this practice. And I can't really see that the Shura faction has abandoned Takaza and Amal. I mean, the ritualized process has such deep roots in the movement that it would be very surprising and something we may want to observe in future if that really changes in Pakistan.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Reetz. So let me check. We have more questions. So it is from Suhaib Ali. So as you have stated, in Pakistan, key Tablighi Jamaat figures like Maulana Tariq Jamal interacted with the Prime Minister and helped disseminate government guidelines about COVID-19. Many observers of Tablighi Jamaat in Pakistan have urged that this increased and very visible interaction with the government figures has diluted the traditional position of the Jamaat to be seen as politically non-partisan. How do you view these shifting dynamics?
The activities of the Tablighi Jamaat are negotiated on various levels. As I'm trying to argue, there is not necessarily a contradiction because, I mean, there is a reason why Tariq Jamil was not elected the Amir of the Pakistan section when a couple of years ago the former Amir died, because in strictly ulema terms, he is not seen as the prime, how to say, source or speaker of wisdom for the Tablighi Jamaat concept and practice. But he is, I mean, they cannot do without him, which showed in the fact that he played a key role in the election of the new Amir, that he was there during the burial ceremony of the former Amir, and they are relying on him as some sort of a guarantor, as some sort of security, but they will also keep the freedom from him and operate in their own way, which, for instance, among other things, showed in the fact that the Ravin meeting was not cancelled as the Punjab government has actually desired. It was rather only after the second day that they actually did finish it earlier, and then on the argument of heavy rain. So the tension between those from the inside Intizam, where Tariq Jamil is not, and his status as a communicator, celebrity, and televangelist is there and will remain.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we covered all the questions. Do you have another question, Dr. Hamdan? I see you.
No.
Brought here in the chat box.
Hello.
Okay.
So I don't really, I mean, so many things cross my mind in this fascinating discussion, not only about Tablighi Jamaat and how they negotiate the state, but also about their kind of, you know, response to the pandemic on theological levels. I think Sohaib Ali's question was a little bit about that as well, like to what extent is this, you know, some of your slides indicated, to what extent is there a conviction that the pandemic is something that you don't do anything about because it's a punishment from on high, or to what extent is being a member of the Tablighi Jamaat a kind of protection against the pandemic, and how that plays in with sectarian politics and, you know, all that. So many things to consider. And what you've done today is give us a brief kind of you know, and tantalizing bit of your research on all these questions, and we really appreciate that. So on behalf of the center, I'd like to, and my colleagues and our participants today and people who join the meeting, I'd like to say thank you very much, Dr. Reetz, for a thought-provoking and fascinating webinar. And we wish you well.
Thank you also for having me here, and I wish you all the best in those difficult and trying times.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.